We're live. Welcome, Mike James, who's going to tell us all the bits and pieces of Avalonia today and how it fits in with Xamarin and the broader picture of UI. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, that's about right. I'm just pulling up the slide deck. So the idea is to kind of give an answer to a question that has been asked of me a lot, which is how does Avalonia fit into the world of cross-platform UI frameworks for .NET developers? Because we've now got a couple of options available to us, and that each has its own kind of strengths and weaknesses. And from my perspective, I think that there's a really good use case for Avalonia, especially for Xamarin developers. And I think that the same is true in the opposite side, that there's a good use case for Xamarin.Forms for Avalonia developers. So this is an opportunity to kind of explain what Avalonia is, how it compares to WPF and Xamarin.Forms, and how you might want to use it to build cross-platform applications.
All right. I'll leave the stage to you, Mike. Maybe if you want to introduce yourself beforehand.
Yeah, let me share my screen. And I'm going to want to swap. There we go. Can you see the slide deck? Silence.
Oh, I had to put myself to the stream again, but we can see it. Go ahead, Mike.
Perfect. I've just managed to shrink the presenter notes so I can actually now see what's happening on the screen, on the stream, even on the stream screen theme. It's a tongue twister. Yeah, cool. Okay, so cross-platform .NET UI. So who is this guy? Well, my name is Mike James, and I'm a former Xamarin employee. So I was a developer evangelist at Xamarin, and then I joined Microsoft in 2016 with the acquisition. I've lived in Amsterdam and Brussels, but currently live in London. Some personal information: I play far too much Flight Simulator, usually the A320. So if anyone wants to talk nerd out about flight sim or aviation in general, my Twitter is always open for that, and I play the synth in the background there to make some music. A question I get asked an awful lot at the moment is, how does Avalonia compare to, and the most common are WPF and Xamarin. So the focus of this session is going to be to answer those questions. How does it compare to WPF, and how does that fit in with Xamarin? So first of all, let's actually take a look at what is Avalonia. I think it's a good place to begin to get a kind of solid foundation to understand what the framework actually is. So Avalonia is a cross-platform XAML-based UI framework for .NET. So just a little like Xamarin.Forms and WPF, or any XAML framework, to be fair, you don't have to use XAML. You can use code behind and create your UIs entirely with C#, but for the most part, developers are going to be using it for its XAML capabilities. And I like to think of Avalonia as a spiritual successor to WPF. So I've been building WPF applications for a while now, for many years, and it's something that I've always come back to. When I needed to build something quickly, I would often just spin up a little WPF app because it's like a warm old jumper. It feels very safe and familiar. But the problem with WPF is obviously it's tied to Windows, and it's not going to allow me to run that application across multiple platforms. But it is an incredibly powerful way to build your applications. So it's great for Windows-specific desktop apps, but it's not so good for cross-platform. Whereas Avalonia is a great solution for all desktop applications. So regardless of the platforms that you want to target, Avalonia provides you the opportunity to take that existing WPF experience and knowledge you have and then build for these non-Microsoft platforms. So Scott Hanselman has said Avalonia is an open source project that clearly takes its inspiration from Avalon and has an unapologetic love for XAML. So if you didn't know, WPF's code name was Avalon. So there's a little kind of nudge and a wink within the Avalonia name to its pedigree and its history and where it's coming from. So it's been open source since its inception. So it started in 2013 by Stephen Kirk. In my mind, I always want to call him Captain because he's like the boss. But I haven't tried it yet, although if he's watching this, he'll now know that. It's got a lot of active contributors. And it's been growing. The number of people that are contributing keeps going up, which is amazing to see. So it's not been an overnight success. It's not like this was launched last week or whatever. It's been around for some time, and it's matured over time, and it's grown in stability and popularity through the years. And the last kind of 12 to 18 months, we've seen a huge kind of boost in usage and interest in Avalonia, as can be seen when you look at the stats on GitHub. For example, looking at the graph showing stars over time, or you look at the data around how many people are installing the Visual Studio extension. So a couple of facts about Avalonia. It supports .NET Framework, but I think most importantly, for me, the important thing is it supports .NET Core. So I don't really use Mono or .NET Framework anymore. Most of the code I write tends to be for .NET Core, which Avalonia supports out the gate, which is absolutely fantastic. It has a familiar XAML dialect. So if you've ever built a WPF or a UWP or a Xamarin.Forms app using XAML, you can bring along that existing knowledge that you have to build a Avalonia app. Now, depending on which one of these you've used previously will depend on how much mileage you get with that. I think it's probably easiest for people that have WPF experience to leverage that with Avalonia. But any type of XAML experience is going to put you in a good place to begin exploring what you can do. And you can code with any .NET language. So whilst the documentation is mostly focused, or entirely focused, I should say, on C#, if you're an F# developer or VB.NET or any other obscure language that someone's created that runs on .NET, you can use that to build your Avalonia application. And it's also a proven and viable path for WPF modernization projects. And I'm going to touch on that a little later, but I think that's, for a lot of people looking at why they should use Avalonia, I think the modernization path is a really strong argument for why you should consider it. So you can bring your favorite .NET tools. So it doesn't really matter what tools you're using because we've got that .NET Core support, and your Avalonia app can sit in a standard .NET or a .NET standard library. No matter what IDE you're using, if you've got IntelliSense and it understands C#, then you're pretty much good to go. We do have some previewers. So we have a previewer for Visual Studio on PC, a previewer for Rider. And I've also put a box here around Visual Studio Code. Now that's a work in progress. It's not actually released yet, but the previewer is kind of like the previewer in the world of Xamarin. You write your XAML, you get an instant update of how your app is going to look. It doesn't have a drag and drop UI designer from the world of WPF, but those are very 90s. You wouldn't use Dreamweaver to build a website. in 2021. So you shouldn't be using drag and drop UI creation to build your UIs. Now, the glaring omission here in the middle would be Visual Studio for Mac, which, whilst you can absolutely use it to build your Avalonia application, there's no real integration there yet. So there's no XAML previewer. But this is something that I want to fix personally, and it's something I've been exploring. It is on hold and there's no timeline yet, but it is something that I'd like to resolve for the community. So in terms of platforms, Avalonia can build for a variety of platforms. And just to give some context to this, not all of them are stable. In fact, the mobile offerings are in preview, so I wouldn't consider them production ready. I wouldn't advise anyone go out and build a huge Avalonia app for Android or iOS today. There are people that are absolutely shipping mobile apps with Avalonia, but I think that Xamarin.Forms probably right now presents a much better option. And then on the website, there's a proof of concept that demonstrates Avalonia applications running in WebAssembly. That's unreleased. And again, there's no timeline for when that might kind of mature into stable, but there are at least examples of different approaches that could be taken to enable WebAssembly support in the future. Where Avalonia really shines is this left-hand side. It's the desktop realm, where WPF shone. So that's Windows, and we have Mac OS and Linux support. Now, Windows and Mac OS are very popular operating systems, and especially with Mac OS, you don't really need to worry about too many flavors. And with Windows, again, there's not a huge amount of variety there, but Linux is a totally different beast. And there's very, very good support for Linux within Avalonia. In fact, if you can run X11, then you're pretty much good to go. It's the only requirement. But these are the more popular distros that we tend to see Avalonia being used on. So, for example, if you need to build an app for a Raspberry Pi, you don't need to go and use something like GDK Sharp to create an application. You can use Avalonia, which is going to offer you a much better development experience. But let's say that you want to build an application for Linux and you don't want to have a desktop environment. Well, can you do that? Yes, you can. So Avalonia has two ways to run on Linux. As I mentioned about X11, so you've got the X windowing system. If the distribution or the distro supports X11, then you're good to go. But if you want to avoid the overhead of the X window system, you can go ahead and use the frame buffer mode, which is using the frame buffer mode is using very low level APIs that are built into the Linux kernel to allow you to set the pixels on the GPU directly, effectively. So what this means is that you don't have to ship a desktop environment, and it's really popular way to build embedded systems. So if you're building an embedded device and you want to run Linux, you might not want to have GNOME or KDE. You want kind of to boot up and to be straight into your app and to not have all of the extra overhead and nonsense that comes with a full desktop environment. So you could use the frame buffer mode. So as I say, really good for embedded systems, or if you were building a kiosk type of solution, then this is a really good way that you can leverage Avalonia. And it's actually one of the things that kind of drew me and made me go, wow, this is really interesting. I've tweeted a few times about this lighting control project that I keep coming back to. I started it at university, which was well over a decade ago, and it was this huge WPF app, and it's something I chip away at when I get an urge to. It's not something I've worked on consistently. And what with WPF, when I thought about how am I going to release this, they tend to run in embedded devices, and a lot of manufacturers that use WPF in that world will use Windows embedded. But again, I didn't want to be locked down to just one operating system. And why should I ship an entire desktop operating system when I'm just building an embedded device effectively? So this frame buffer mode is really powerful. Anyway, that's enough about Linux. Let's have a look at the common usages, common usage. Obviously, with any project, you get new projects, so the kind of greenfield, and then you have modernization or porting projects or maintenance of existing projects. So let's have a look at some new projects. So this was a kind of file new solution with Avalonia. And this is Grit Genie, which is a new digital graphics engine for the game and movie effects, game and movie visual effects. So the editor here is built entirely with Avalonia. The 3D bit in the middle is their own custom, I think probably C++. I'm not entirely sure, but it's their own custom engine. They take the pixels and they shove it into basically a canvas within Avalonia. But everything outside of that 3D bit is an Avalonia application. So it's an extremely powerful framework for building complex applications. This kind of application would be extremely difficult to achieve in a framework like Xamarin.Forms. But within the realm of desktop UI frameworks, this is pretty much normal in terms of complexity. There's a brilliant open source project which you can go and grab the code for. I'll make sure to include some links to this at the end, which is called Core2D. And this is a vector-based graphics package that runs on macOS, Linux, and Windows. And this is a really neat example of a reasonably complex application. Building cross-platform graphics apps are usually quite difficult to do, but when you've got a consistent API that just works everywhere across all of the platforms, it becomes a lot less of a headache. And what with this being open source, it becomes a really good opportunity to kind of dig in and understand some of the more advanced things that you can do with Avalonia. So I highly recommend checking out this project. And there's also Fluent Search, which is an app that I discovered just this week, and I discovered it before I found out it was a Xamarin, not a Xamarin app, excuse me, an Avalonia app. So I was looking for a better searching solution than the built-in Windows search, which often will send me to the internet when I'm looking for a local file, which is an issue of contention for me. It becomes very frustrating. And I found this Fluent Search, and I was looking at their website, and they were showing that they were searching for an Avalonia file. And I was like, well, that's very peculiar. They know of Avalonia. And it turns out that it's using Avalonia, despite being a tool just for Windows. So much like in the world of Xamarin.Forms, we might decide that we just want to build for Android, or we just want to build for iOS, and we still want the productivity gains that are provided by Xamarin.Forms, but we don't need the cross-platform elements. The same is true for Avalonia. Just because you're using a cross-platform framework doesn't mean that you need to build a cross-platform app. Now, this Fluent Search app integrates very deeply with Windows-specific APIs, so I think it would be quite challenging to make this cross-platform. But nonetheless, the developer has chosen to use Avalonia to create this. And you can download this from the Windows App Store for free. And it was actually developed by a fellow Microsoft employee. So yeah, a very interesting example of a single platform Avalonia app. And then we have modernization. And the most common modernization of apps in the context of Avalonia tends to be, from what I've seen, people wanting to move from WPF. It's not unheard of for companies to be looking to modernize their WinForms applications and bring those over to something like Avalonia as well. But from what I've seen, the norm is usually WPF. So let's just look at one example of an app modernization project, because I think it demonstrates quite succinctly everything that I want to show. And this is a modernization project undertaken by JetBrains, who I'm sure you're familiar with, an industry titan in the world of developer tools, responsible for building the much-loved ReSharper extension for Visual Studio, and the Rider IDE, which enables .NET developers to build for Windows, Mac, and Linux using the same IDE. Now, they've got some auxiliary tools for .NET developers, such as .trace and .memory, that were built using WPF. And they were having a look at how can they bring this to .NET cross-platform. And they looked at all of the various frameworks that were out there and approaches to this modernization project that they had to undertake. And they came to the conclusion that Avalonia was going to be the best option for them, which I think is a hugely valuable statement for the Avalonia team and kind of validation of their work. Because keep in mind, this isn't a huge business employing hundreds of employees that's working to build this code. This is a small but dedicated team of very, very bright engineers that are working to build this stuff. So to have someone like JetBrains come in and say, actually, we're going to bet these really important tools on your technology is, I think it's I would feel very proud if I was one of the engineers working on Avalonia with that kind of endorsement. So the JetBrains team actually put out a statement on Twitter about Avalonia, and they said, "We've been considering making our standalone profilers for .NET cross-platform for some time now, and we've been actively looking for a UI framework to use. As our tools use WPF, Avalonia was an easy choice for us. It is an impressive technology which has seen tremendous growth in recent years, and it feels mature enough to be used for production code. And we greatly appreciate the quick and helpful support that we've had from the Avalonia developers who have addressed our questions." And I've actually got a screenshot here of .memory that was tweeted out by one of the JetBrains advocates that shows one of the views that's been migrated over to Avalonia, just to give a kind of sneak peek of where that's going and how it's going. So it's been trusted by an industry leader and shown to be a viable technology for the modernization of migrating and modernizing extremely complex applications. So one of the reasons that it's possible to do this is because it's like WPF. It's kind of the same but different. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. So if we take this little XAML snippet here, this is creating a window in WPF. And the line I'd like you to focus on is this XAML namespace import. So we're bringing in the WPF XAML namespace. And to migrate this snippet over to Avalonia is literally just changing the XAML namespace. The rest of the code is exactly the same. And now that window with a very basic application, which is just admittedly a button, will now run across a myriad of different platforms. Now, it would be disingenuous of me to suggest that is all you need to do to bring your WPF application over to these new platforms. Avalonia isn't focused on 100% API compatibility. It's about reusing your knowledge, not reusing all of your code. You can absolutely bring a lot of your code over with some kind of massaging and tweaking. Porting is actually pretty easy for the most part, but it's not a solution for copying and pasting your project, or as I say, and it's not focused on 100% API compatibility. where changes needed to occur and improvements could be made, they've been made. And I think that's an important distinction between something like Avalonia and Uno, because obviously Uno allows you to bring your UWP applications to a similar number of platforms as Avalonia, but it's focused on this API compatibility, which that has pros and cons, I think. One of the things I really like about Avalonia is that they don't bring an API, or they don't create an API that isn't going to work across all of the platforms that they're targeting. So you're not going to find yourself in a situation where a particular feature just isn't going to work on a platform that you want to build for. So because Uno is focused on this API compatibility with UWP, they have to follow that religiously, and they can't really break away and make changes where it makes sense. Whereas Avalonia can and has, and so you get, I feel, a much improved developer experience, because you can be kind of confident knowing that the code that you write is actually going to work across all of the platforms exactly the same way, and that you're not going to hit any kind of oddities because you've decided to run it on Linux versus Mac OS, or a particular feature or method hasn't been implemented within Uno on that platform. Avalonia, it all just works. So let's have a look at some of the differences, because as I say, it's not all entirely the same. There have been improvements within the API. So Avalonia has style. I say that as a little joke, but the style system within Avalonia is quite a departure, really, from WPF. So it's kind of a mix of WPF and UWP and CSS. So unlike WPF and Xamarin.Forms, your styles aren't stored in resources. So you don't create a resource dictionary and put all of your styles in there. Instead, they're stored actually in a styles collection. And styles apply to a control that it's defined on and all of its descendants. And a style can be configured on any control, or even on an application object. So it's a very flexible styling system. And if you're familiar with the way of CSS styles, it's very easy to build very modular little chunks of CSS and then apply those to numerous different elements. And to show you what that looks like in the context of Avalonia, here we have a style definition for a text block. So this is our target control type, and we have here the style name. So we have this selector, and we're saying we want to target just a text block, and this is the name of the style that we're setting. And then within our UI code, so within our XAML definition for the view, we can then reference that with the h1 here. As you can see, classes equals h1, which is referencing that selector that we defined. Now, if we wanted, we could also entirely remove the classes equals h1, and if we go back a second, we can remove the .h1 at the end of this selector, and then this style would be applied to all text blocks within. Let's say, for example, we've set this as the control within the control styles. That particular control would then apply this to all of the text blocks that it finds. Or we could do it for the application style, and then it would be applied across the entire application. So I really do like this way of creating styles. And talking kind of styles and visuals and how our application looks, like styles, data templates also aren't stored in resource dictionaries. They're stored in data template collections. Unlike WPF, the data templates can target an interface or a derived class. Now, data templates are something that I wanted in Xamarin.Forms forever, and thankfully it's now available. But they really, for me, data templates are XAML development. A XAML framework that doesn't offer data templates is it's difficult to kind of feel excited about, but Avalonia has really good support for data templates. So on the subject of templates, obviously within WPF, we have templated and non-templated controls, and we have the same concept within Avalonia. So if we look at how we kind of the rough equivalent of these WPF types, you've got the UI element, which maps to the control element in Avalonia. Framework element, again, maps to control. And then WPF, you've got the control, which in Avalonia maps to templated control. It can be a little difficult when you get started to remember these things. But for the most part, when I'm building custom UIs and custom controls, I tend to always use the templated control because it provides me the most flexibility in creating these beautiful themes and looks for my applications. So there are many, 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 many more similarities and improvements around the WPF/Avalonia API. And we actually just published yesterday, and again, this is in preview, but it's the new docs portal, which is docs.avaloniaui.net/MISC/WPF, and that'll take you to a section of our documentation which is focused just for WPF developers to get up to speed to understand some of the differences. So I've been in PowerPoint for long enough. Let's have a look at the IDE, and we'll have a look at creating a fresh project and see what the experience is like. Let me create a new instance of Visual Studio. We'll create a new project. I'm going to use the Avalonia MVVM application. Now this is because I've got the Avalonia extension installed, which is available for free from the Visual Studio Marketplace, but there's also standard .NET templates. So if you want to use the CLI to create your project, you can go ahead and grab those templates, install them on your machine, and you are good to go as well. We'll call this Hello World. I would be surprised if that's the first Hello World I've created on this machine. Haha, apparently it is. So when we create the solution, and let's see, can I zoom in on that? I'm sure, oh crikey, I'm sure there is a way to zoom. Come on now. I'm literally tapping all of the keys and moving my wheel. I can zoom there, but I can't zoom there. Okay, well, hopefully you can see this, but we just have basically a standard MVVM structure. We've got our views, our view models, and we have a models directory. We have an app.xaml, and I'm saying XAML, but the actual extension is AXAML. AXAML, that's difficult to say, AXAML. The reason for that is just to make sure that the Visual Studio IntelliSense side of things doesn't try to assume that this is a WPF bit of XAML. There's been some difficulties around that, but there's actually an entire custom language server built into the extension to provide you the kind of rich IntelliSense experience that you would expect when building your applications. That's telling me I need to build the application in order to see the preview. So I'm going to open up the main window.xaml, and we hit build, and then we go. We've got the preview here on the right hand side, showing us how our application is going to look. And just like with your WPF XAML, we have our window. We've got our XAML namespace imports. It really is just what you already know. And, we can bring in a grid. Let's actually do a stack panel. We'll set some property spacing of maybe 20, and we'll add 2 of those. Maybe we'll set the vertical alignment to center. And set to greeting. Let's set that to greetings 2. Or in fact, let's just change that to a button. So we'll change that to content. Say me. Then for the command, say binding, and I'll say button click. I'll say button clicked. I'm going to copy that so that I don't have to write it again. I'm going to drop into the view model for that. And what's quite nice about Avalonia with the command system is I don't actually have to. If I do, typically we would create like an I command, button clicked, and we'd write some code that looks a bit like this. And obviously we then need to bring in the correct namespace, and then we can create a constructor for the view model. At this point, we can say button clicked equals something, and maybe we're bringing in reactive UI so that we can use the reactive command. Reactive command dot create. Maybe here we're doing clicked. Public void clicked. Boom. And we're going to say greetings equals. I'm going to have to update the world. I'm going to have to update this puppy. So we'll say get set. And in here, I'm going to just set it in the constructor. So that's a super quick little view model. So we've now got our button, which references this button clicked that we're setting here. Let's build that puppy. And now the button is enabled within the previewer, which is validating to me that this button click command is referenced properly, or resolving properly, I should say. Let's quickly run that. Evidently, I can't code. That's what I expect. The thing I wanted to show you that I particularly like is the ability to kind of forgo the I command. We can actually just create a command straight to a method. I really like. Oh, I know why it's not updating. It is updating, but because it's not raising the property change notification, because I'm an idiot, I'd have to. I mean, we can fix this. One of my favorite things is getting things wrong and then realizing that I am a cretin and that I need to fix it. So we'll say greeting. And now we're going to do get greeting. Ooh. And we'll say raise and set if changed, plus a reference to greeting, and then the value. This raise and set if change is coming from the view model base, which is inheriting from reactive object, which comes from reactive UI. It's just a nice little helper that if this value has changed, it's going to raise the iProperty notify change event for us, which obviously the UI is going to pick up. So let's rerun that and let's actually show that it works. Da-da-da. There we go. Beautiful, beautiful. So I don't actually have to have the command. I can get rid of this. It's not needed if I don't want to. Down to you to decide which way you want to take it, but both work. You can have your command go straight to the method, or you can create a actual implementation of I command if that's more your thing. There are some really nice themes as well. I want to show you those before we move on. We've obviously got this theme here is the Fluent Light, which is the kind of modern Windows light version, but we also have a dark variant of that as well. So if we come back and we rebuild, we've now got the dark version. And what with all of the controls being template controls or templated controls, it's very easy to customize the look of these. So I've been working on a Mac OS style set of controls as well. So yeah, very, very easy to get started with. If you, as I say, if you've ever done any XAML development before, you're going to know how it works. So Xamarin.Forms So I think that Avalonia and Xamarin.Forms make a great partnership for cross-platform app dev. I think it's less about migration and more about collaboration when we think about mobile and Xamarin and how that fits in with Avalonia. So it's about how can we leverage the strength of each framework rather than just having to modernize and replace. Because obviously Xamarin is modern. It doesn't need any modernization. So I think the key thing for me is that Xamarin and Avalonia, they solve very different problems. Mobile and desktop are different beasts entirely. And desktop workloads are inherently more complex than mobile. And we can see this in a variety of different applications that support both paradigms. If we take Adobe Photoshop, which, disclaimer, it's not a Xamarin app and it's also not an Avalonia app, but what it is an app that runs across desktop and mobile. These are very different applications. You only have to look at the UI to see that they're totally different beasts. Whilst they may allow you to accomplish very similar things, the way that they're designed, the functionality that's included, everything really in terms of what the user is looking at is entirely different. So I like to think about cross-platform as also cross-paradigm. So there's a paradigm of desktop development and there's a paradigm of mobile development or mobile platforms. And they bring with them a set of differences that need to be accommodated for when designing and thinking about building applications. So, this should be really obvious to anyone that's built a mobile app that you can't just take a desktop application and throw it onto a phone and expect users to be able to use it. The touch points just wouldn't work. Going from a cursor to touch requires the buttons and all of those control elements to be larger. The screen sizes themselves are smaller on mobile. Even if you've got an iPad Pro, you're still not competing there with a huge desktop display. The text input is often a physical keyboard on a PC versus a touchscreen keyboard on a mobile device, or maybe a pen. The navigation system are entirely different. So on desktop, we tend to see the kind of column-based navigation. If you think about Outlook with your emails, where you've got the master detail, so we see the columns as the norm, and we often see multi-window applications. So you can open multiple windows to accomplish a single task. PowerPoint, for example, that opens up lots of child windows as you're creating your presentations. That doesn't transition very well over to the mobile side of things, where for a phone you typically look at push and pop. So you're pushing into new screens and then you're popping them off because you just don't have enough real estate to have the multiple columns. On the larger devices, such as tablets, you do start to see the columns paradigm come in, but again, those touch points are so much larger that the density of data that you're getting on the screen is a lot less. And you definitely don't see multi-window for the same application on these tablet versions of the applications. In terms of performance, obviously desktops and laptops are going to be faster than your mobile devices, so you have to think about what features am I shipping, and then there's multitasking. It's the norm on desktop. It's expected that I'm going to be multitasking and running multiple apps at once, whereas on mobile it's limited or non-existent. So these paradigms are totally different, and the idea that we can take our code, our desktop code, and run it on a mobile app is madness. I think as I say, anyone that's done mobile development understands that. And I find the counter argument that we're going to take our mobile app and we're going to run that on a desktop equally as mad. I simply cannot fathom how you expect to deliver a decent user experience by taking this approach and not taking into consideration these huge differences in terms of the way that people interact with the devices and people's expectations around functionality. So mobile workloads tend to be simpler. That doesn't mean that the things that they're doing are easier. Photo editing, the likes of Photoshop, is still, from an engineering perspective, one of the more difficult types of apps to build. So it's not that mobile development is easier; it's that the way that users interact with these applications tend to focus on simplicity over functionality. So it's kind of form over function is the way that I perceive this. I'm happy to have a debate on that if people disagree with me. So my view is that mobile apps are great for content consumption, but they still fail to compete with their desktop counterparts when it comes to content creation. It's whilst people do sit down and edit movies and create songs on their phones and iPads or whatever, most people that are doing this professionally will reach out for a desktop OS in order to create content. And I talked a little bit about how bringing mobile apps to desktop seems to me to be the wrong way to approach it, just like it was always wrong to go desktop to mobile without appreciating the differences. I don't think it works, and I think we've got evidence of this from the two key players. Windows 8, the feedback from users was that, well, you can see what the feedback was in Windows 10. They brought back the kind of desktop metaphor for the operating system, and I've explored and played around with Catalyst from Apple, which is this ability to bring over iPad applications to the Mac. And I'm shocked at the quality of the applications. Mac OS for me has historically always delivered uncompromising quality when it comes to applications, especially the applications that come bundled with the operating system, but even the applications from third-party developers. AppKit has historically been very difficult to develop for, and thus the barrier to entry has been very high. And the result of that is the quality of Mac applications, native Mac applications, has been very good. I think that Catalyst is diluting that. I think that the quality of apps like Home, which I show here, it only works on a tablet. It isn't what I expect. This is too simplistic functionality for a desktop application. If it were a stopgap, I'd be happy. But if this is the final destination, then I have to question the logic behind this cross paradigm. So my view is that we should all be designing for the paradigm that we're targeting. We should forget this idea that we're going to write once and run it everywhere. This is not going to deliver a delightful experience. Now, with that, I'm not saying that we need to go out and pick hundreds of different frameworks, or have to rewrite our app thousands of times or numerous times in order to build for these multiple paradigms. But I think that the idea that we would write it once and run it everywhere needs to kind of be expelled as a myth, unless it's an extraordinarily simple application. And so this is where I see the kind of Xamarin and Avalonia being complementary to each other. Because I would say that Avalonia has got a lot of strengths in the realm of desktop, and it's a little weaker on the mobile side. And Xamarin is the kind of counterpoint to that it's extremely, extremely powerful on the mobile side, but it's weak on the desktop side. And that's because Avalonia was, from its creation, considered desktop focused. And Xamarin.Forms was created with a mobile focus. So they set out to solve different problems, and they've both done that extremely well. But to then try and take a framework that has been focused on a particular paradigm and just bring that over to a new paradigm presents, I would say, some issues. So my view is that you should be using something like Avalonia for your desktop applications and Xamarin for your mobile applications. So Avalonia and Xamarin.Forms can coexist in a kind of beautiful relationship. So build your mobile apps with Xamarin and deliver that native experience. A lot of mobile users are expecting a native user interface, and desktop apps are expecting complexity. And one of the things I think is important is that with mobile applications, you're often competing against apps from a cross-platform perspective. In the world of Xamarin, you're competing against apps built with Java or Swift or Objective-C, and those deliver almost the same experience as the Xamarin apps because they're also native applications. On desktop, it's a little different because everyone seems to be migrating to Electron. So if you build an application that looks and feels native and delivers good performance without having to bundle an entire browser along with it, then you're already going to make your users slightly happier with you. And as I say, you can build these complex applications with Avalonia for the desktop. And that doesn't mean that you have to rewrite everything. You have the ability to share your code. And that's actually how we got on to have this session today. And don't worry if you can't see the code on the right-hand side. This is just an image from a tweet that I sent out last week or the week before, I forget now. But it shows a sample application, which is the Xamarin tip calculator. It's a very American thing, isn't it? But you have any service provided to you in America, and you have to top up their wage, and obviously we need apps to be able to calculate that. So on the bottom we have the Xamarin.Forms version of this application, and then on the top we have the Avalonia equivalent. And what I wanted to do was understand, well, how much code can I share? How easy would it be to actually leverage the view models and the converters and the business logic and all of the bits that I should be able to share. And yeah, this kind of came out at the end of it. So we'll jump into the code for that in a moment, but I just want to talk about the key differences between Avalonia and Xamarin.Forms from kind of technical perspective. In terms of platforms, they're very similar to each other. As I say, Avalonia has got the preview for mobile, but the desktop is nailed. That's in the bag and working really well. And there is a potential path to web support, but nothing concrete yet. Obviously, with MAUI, the Linux support is being left to the community. So that's something that if you're looking to target Linux today, then you may want to use this approach of Xamarin.Forms for the mobile side, Avalonia for the desktop side, because that's going to give you a really good strategy for delivering these best experiences and not having to wait for MAUI to support Linux. The key differences, I would say, are around the strengths and the rendering. So the rendering on Xamarin.Forms, as we all know, is a native widget. You ask for a button on iOS, you get a UI button. With Avalonia, you're using Skier, or they're using Skier. This is a really key difference. So we've, as I say, on the Xamarin side, we've all seen this slide. We've got our shared code, our UI code, which we're sharing. That's an abstraction on the native UI toolkit, and we have our native UI applications, and our users love us for shipping these apps to them. They're performant, they look and feel right, and yeah, enough said about that. We all know about it. On the Avalonia side of things, we still got our shared C# backend. We have our shared UI code, but it's running on the Skier graphics engine. So the only actual thing that we need from the operating system or the platform that we're running on is something to throw some pixels into. So as I say, on Linux it could be X11 or the frame buffer. On Mac OS we just need a NS window, and then on Windows we just need a native Windows in order to start painting, and then we're good to go. Everything inside of the window that we're actually looking at, all of the buttons, the pixels, the bits, our UI, the bits we care about, are drawn for us using Skier. And this isn't uncommon. This is found across a myriad of different apps. And then, two of the most well-known approaches or technologies that are using Skier for drawing would be Chrome be it the browser or even the operating system, Chrome OS, Android, Firefox is using Skier for some drawing, and then we've obviously got Flutter. So this is, a proven approach to creating creating a cross-platform UI. But with Avalonia, obviously, we get to do it from C# and XAML rather than having to use something like Dart. And because we're using that same rendering engine across all of the platforms, we have pixel perfect apps. So one of the big benefits of building apps with Electron is that it's pixel perfect. You run it on a Mac and it's going to look exactly the same, apart from obviously the window, as the Linux and the Windows counterpart. But you haven't had to rebuild it every single time, and you get that bonus and that capability when you use something like Avalonia because of that dependency. So pixel perfect apps become incredibly easy when you're using Avalonia. Then we have the code sharing. So kind of in the world of traditional Xamarin, you might share your code by creating the UI with a storyboard for iOS, and then maybe your Android XML for Android. And then along came Xamarin.Forms, and we would write it in XAML. But we always kind of thought about code sharing as the boring bits, the business logic, the models, the services, and then creating these custom UIs on top. So that's a really valid strategy for introducing something like Avalonia to the party. But if you're using Xamarin.Forms, there's also a good opportunity to share even more code. So there's additional sharing opportunities with the view models and even converters. So this was something that really surprised me, and I'll show you it in the code demo in a second. I'm just conscious of time. And there's also, I forgot I was even going to mention this, but there's also, it's a community-backed project. So it's not from the Avalonia team, but there's been an individual that's actually got Xamarin.Forms backend running on Avalonia. And because if you think about Avalonia as that spiritual successor to WPF, just like with Xamarin.Forms, you have a WPF backend. You can build your Xamarin.Forms app and it will run using WPF. We can actually do the same thing with Avalonia. And this is really interesting to me, especially in the context of Maui, because I've talked about how fantastic the Linux support is with Avalonia. And I think that could be a really viable option. So I'm personally waiting to see how Maui lands before I start to play around with it. But I think that a community-backed Avalonia backend for the Linux Maui side of things could be quite interesting. And as I say, there's already a project out there that supports it for Xamarin.Forms, at least as a proof of concept. But I'll demo that in a moment. So this is the application running across the myriad of platforms here. So let's actually just jump back into the IDE. How am I doing for time? Very close to the limit, as always. So let me close. Discard? Yeah, we'll discard. Live on the edge. So we have our Xamarin.Forms application. It's the tip demo. Let's launch the Android version. You can grab this demo from GitHub from the Xamarin.Forms samples repository on GitHub. So we're going to build this for Android. And we patiently wait for Android to do its thing. Come on, Android. Here we go. So we've been out post-COVID. We're gonna eat until we throw up or explode. Just one more wafer thin slice, and then I can set my tip here. So that that works. Cool. I want to add some Avalonia to this. Before we do that, I actually want to create some shared projects. So I want to take the view model, this puppy here, that's doing the grunt of the work, and I want to take the converters, because if we look at the view, it's obviously got the view model behind it, but it's also got some converters for these values. So I've actually, because we're short on time, in Blue Peter fashion, which is a children's show in Britain, if you're unsure what the hell I'm talking about, I have one I made earlier. Here's one I made earlier, not of cardboard though, which would be typical of Blue Peter. So I have created a folder called Avalonia. I've created an Avalonia application in it. Like before, it's pretty basic. It's just saying hello world at the moment. And I've created a shared project, which isn't something I usually do. I usually feel quite strongly against shared projects. But I did this because both of them implement well, it's the same API. It's exactly the same, but it lives in a different namespace. So this iValue converter. So I can just reuse the converters across Avalonia and Xamarin.Forms. But I wanted to minimize the amount of shared projects that I would have to use. So I put my view model in a standard or a .NET standard library. So that's the same view model that used to exist in the Xamarin project. So we can obviously go ahead and add the shared project and start to write out the code, but I'm going to skip forward to save some time. I'm going to put all of this code on GitHub. So if you're scratching your head going, what the hell is this guy talking about? Then rest assured, there will be more information, or at least the ability for you to do this yourself, should you want to. Let's have a look. Did that changing of the branch help me? Yes, it did. So if we rebuild the app, I should have just done the Avalonia one. But here we go. We're going to build the app. We've got the XAML. It just needed a bit of massaging in order to become Avalonia XAML. I really did just copy and paste the Xamarin.Forms XAML and start tweaking. Some of the control names are slightly different, and the APIs just needed tweaks. It didn't need anything major. It's using that same view model, which is defined here. We're setting the data context for the main window. The Xamarin side of things, obviously nothing really changes there. It's just referencing this shared code. And I can set a startup project, hit build, and now we're running on Windows using Avalonia. And I also have Ubuntu with it running here as well. So I can say 500. Oh, hang on, where's my caps lock? Numlock. More like dumb lock with my brain. Yeah, so we've got the app running here on Ubuntu. Obviously, my Mac's next to me, but that'd be challenging to show you, but it works there as well. And then lastly, let me go to the last one. Yes, let's stop debugging. And this is, I think, really, really quite fun. So we've got our Xamarin, we've got our Avalonia, and then we've got some madness. What is this madness, Mr. James? This is Avalonia is what I've called the project, but it's this Avalonia backend for Xamarin.Forms. So it's the same app, but it's using the Xamarin.Forms project, so the shared Xamarin.Forms project, and an Avalonia-based backend to render this. So this is like 100% code reuse for Xamarin.Forms, while still targeting desktop. And this would obviously run exactly the same as a normal Avalonia app, because it is just a normal Avalonia app. It's getting its views from the Xamarin side of things. So we could have this as a kiosk app using the frame buffers on Linux, or we can run it on the Pi or wherever we want. But it's 100% Xamarin.Forms, but using Avalonia as a backend. So there's like a few different options available to us for sharing code and kind of having harmony between Xamarin.Forms and Avalonia. In terms of roadmap, there's IME support coming, right to left support, accessibility. It's a hot topic at the moment. There's a new composition rendering system on the way, which is going to allow some really interesting kind of animations. There's a new documentation portal that we published yesterday. And as I've mentioned previously, we've got the iOS, Android, and potentially WebAssembly graduating from proof of concept and previews into something stable. No promises on that though. Get involved and learn more. Well, how do you learn more? You can go to avaloniaui.net. It's on GitHub, obviously, like all good open source projects. There's also an active Gitter chat, and there's also the Twitter handle as well. So do reach out to the community. If you have questions, just whack them in the chat, and I may not get to them right this second, but I will definitely get to them and respond to you in due course. I will publish all of the code you just saw onto my GitHub, which is github.com/mikehost.net. You can connect with me on Twitter. Say always happy to respond to people, especially if it's about cross-platform or aviation or synthesis. Basically, look at what I'm interested in, message me, and you have a very high chance of me responding, because I love to chat about things. So yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak about this stuff, and hopefully it's been useful, beneficial, and you've learned a few things and given some kind of food for thought about how you can leverage Avalonia and Xamarin at the same time to build these great experiences.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much. I mean, Mike is only doing this for the fame, so he's not getting any money for it. Thank you so much. I can only quote Dave Evans here. I'll show it. Very impressive. I'm with him there. I think I saw even more things that I like about Avalonia. As I said before, when we started talking, I think it's bridging the gap to the desktop for Xamarin.Forms. Yeah, I'm really happy with it. Thank you for explaining and showing and sharing your knowledge with us. So let's see if there are any questions. Here's something. Wayland is replacing X11. What's your roadmap regarding Wayland?
I have absolutely no idea, but I can find out, and I can find out, and I'll put a blog post up about it, and we'll make sure that we've got some docs around that migration. Yeah, as I say, the engineering guys, they are on the ball. So if that is what's happening in the world of Linux, then they will be aware of it, and there will be a plan in place.
All right, I think that's it with questions. Or did you want to add something, Mike?
No. I'm just having a look at the questions as well. Somebody pointed out I needed the iProperty notified with the greeting property. They were Aidan, very correct. I didn't see that at the time, but my brain eventually caught up with what I was trying to do, which is often the case. It's a few minutes behind where I want to be.
All right. So if you have something that we should post later on YouTube in the show notes, let me know and I'll put it there. On another note, we have 3 licenses of the company that you mentioned a couple of times to give away today. And that is the JetBrains Rider. If you want to win a JetBrains Rider license, one of the 3, please just shoot me an email at the xamarin.cologne@outlook.com email address that I'm just displaying. The first 3 to send me an email will get a full license for JetBrains Rider with updates for a year and a perpetual fallback license. So thanks for that to JetBrains. Well, what's left to say, Mike? Thank you very, very much for the time and for all the great examples. I'm looking forward to see what you did on GitHub. And if you update me with where you put it, then I'll make sure to put it in the show notes.
I will grab a drink because I am parched beyond belief. But once I've had a drink, I will get it up onto GitHub and I will send you some show notes to share.
All right, perfect. So thank you very much, and
Thank
have
you.
a great Friday and have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.